You can't bring Dad back, Mom, but Claire's birthday is only once a year. Those were my son's words. It was 8:17 a.m. I had called to ask if he'd be at the church by 11. My voice had cracked on the words, "I don't want to stand alone." Daniel laughed, like I was being dramatic. Claire booked the venue months ago, non-refundable. She'd be crushed. Then quieter, like he was doing me a favor. "Try not to make this about you." I remember staring at the sink, water dripping from the tap, too stunned to move. The line went dead. I didn't call back. By 10:45, neighbors were arriving. My sister Mary pulled up in her minivan, her mouth set in a thin line even before she hugged me. The church was full, neighbors, co-workers, even the old pharmacist from the corner shop. But the seat beside me stayed empty. Mary leaned over and whispered, "Where's Daniel?" I didn't look at her. He had other commitments. She blinked, confused. But the music started before she could ask more. The pastor's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling. "We're gathered here to honor the life of John Whitmore." I folded my hands, trying to keep them from shaking. People said kind things. They always do. They talked about John's laugh, his loyalty, his garden. They didn't mention how he used to sit up late doing Daniel's algebra homework with him after long shifts at the factory. He would have wanted Daniel here, and Daniel should have been here. But instead, he was across town, clinking champagne glasses, probably telling some tired story about how hard he'd worked to build his company, never mentioning who kept him afloat through every mistake. My eyes drifted to the front row. Claire's parents were there. Not for John, of course. For me. Claire's mother patted my hand during the hymns. "We're so sorry, Helen." "This must be unbearable." I nodded. It was. But not for the reason she thought. After the service, people trickled outside. Some stayed to hug me. Some pretended not to notice I was alone. Mary lingered by the guest book, her mouth tight. "I know he's your son, but I swear to God." "Don't," I said sharply. Then softer, "Please don't." I wasn't ready. Not yet. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want outrage. What I wanted desperately was for this to be some misunderstanding. For Daniel to come running up the steps, breathless, flowers in hand, apologizing. But instead, my phone buzzed in my purse. A text from him. "Hope it went okay. Claire says hi." I stared at it for a long time. Not "I'm sorry," not "I love you." Just a casual afterthought. That's when it hit me, deep in my chest. I was no longer the center of his life. I wasn't even the edge. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed. The house was too quiet. John's slippers still sat by the dresser. His shaving kit was untouched in the bathroom, the way he'd left it. And me? I lay there, flat on my back, staring at the ceiling fan, remembering every dollar, every favor, every yes we had given our son. I don't know why grief always makes you tally things, but it does. It starts small. The first memory was Daniel's braces. $5, $600. Then came college. We co-signed his first car, a dark blue Accord. I remember the salesman handing the keys to Daniel like he was royalty. John smiled so wide that day, and Daniel never once looked back at us when he drove away. Then the house. Claire had cried during the showing. "I can't raise a baby in an apartment," she'd said. John took a loan against his pension so they could close. $112,000. Gone. Then the wedding. The photographer alone was $14,000. Claire wanted swans. Actual swans? I said, "This is too much." John said, "He's our only son." And I had nodded, because that's what mothers do when their husbands want to believe in their children. But now, with John gone, it all felt like a bad investment. Not in money. In faith. We believed in Daniel. And when I sat in that church pew alone, that belief cracked wide open. Because when you give someone everything and they give you nothing when it matters most, what does that say about what you meant to them? I finally pulled myself up, bones aching. I made coffee, but it tasted like ash. The house echoed too much without John's footsteps. On the kitchen table, under a pile of unopened mail, I saw it. A folder labeled, "For Helen, if anything happens." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were receipts, spreadsheets, copies of wire transfers, notes in John's handwriting, tuition, $176,000, house support, $112,000, wedding costs, $87,000, emergency loans, $35,000, total, $932,000, nearly $1 million. Every cent given freely. At the bottom, John had written, "Don't let Daniel forget us. We gave him everything." I pressed the paper to my chest and wept. Not because I wanted it back, but because I finally knew he'd never even noticed. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Daniel. "Hey, Claire says hi again. Do you think you can help us with a little gift for her birthday? It got more expensive than we expected. $12,000 should cover it. Let me know. Love you." 12,000. 12,000. He had missed his father's funeral, and less than 24 hours later he was asking me to fund a birthday party. I didn't cry. I just stared at the message. And in that still, airless moment, I understood something John must have seen long before me. Daniel wasn't just ungrateful, he was entitled. And it was time, past time, to show him what happens when the giving stops. I didn't answer right away. I set the phone down like it was something dangerous. A snake, coiled. Outside, the sun was rising behind our backyard fence, the one John and Daniel built when Daniel was 16 and full of big plans. He'd told us he wanted to be a builder then. By 25, he wanted a business of his own, and we helped. Oh God, how we helped. But that text, asking for $12,000 after ignoring his own father's burial, that was the last line. Something in me turned, not snapped, shifted. My phone buzzed again. "Daniel, hey, you there?" Then, "Claire's hoping we can lock this down by tomorrow. It's a custom venue." A smile formed on my lips. Not the warm kind, the kind that forms when the fog finally clears and you see just how far you've been walked over. I texted back 2 words. "I'm busy." Then I picked up the folder, shoved the papers back inside, and grabbed my purse. It was time for the one thing I should have done years ago. Talk to a lawyer. Because if Daniel was going to treat me like a bank, he was about to learn what happens when the bank closes and calls in the debt. The next morning, my phone rang at 9:13 a.m. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. Then again at 9:28 and 9:32. I finally picked up on the 4th call, standing in the parking lot outside Ms. Dalton's law office, watching the breeze rattle dead leaves around the sidewalk. "Mom," he said, like he hadn't just disrespected his father's memory and my grief in one effortless week. "Mom, listen, I didn't mean to come off rude yesterday. I know it was a rough day. We were just overwhelmed. You know Claire gets emotional around her birthday." I didn't say a word, just listened. He kept going. "And now she's feeling guilty, which means I'm the bad guy. So look, can you help us out with the venue? It's $12,000, but we already paid a deposit. If we cancel, we lose everything." Everything. He meant the cake, the party bus, the ice sculpture she'd ordered in the shape of a champagne bottle. I tightened my grip on the phone. Inside the office, I could see Miss Dalton at her desk through the window, reviewing papers. She looked calm, focused, exactly how I wanted to feel. "Daniel," I said, finally. He stopped talking. There was a pause, just long enough for hope to flicker in his voice. "Yes?" I took a breath. Then, with more calm than I felt, "No." Silence. "What do you mean, no?" His tone wasn't angry yet, just confused, like maybe he'd misheard me. "I said no," I repeated, clear and slow. "No, I will not give you $12,000. No, I will not fund another party. And no, I don't care if Claire is upset." There it was, that sharp inhale on the other end. The moment his entitlement met its first wall, he tried to laugh it off. "Mom, you're grieving. This isn't like you." "If Dad were alive," I cut him off. "If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed of you." That landed. I heard it in the way he went quiet. "After everything we gave you, you couldn't give us one thing back. 1 day, 1 hour. To bury your father?" Still, no answer. So I gave him one more truth. This is where it ends, Daniel." Then I hung up. I didn't cry. I walked inside Ms. Dalton's office and sat down across from her desk. She looked at me kindly. "How can I help you today?" I opened my bag and pulled out the folder. I said, "I want to make sure my son never sees another cent from me again." I pulled out the manila envelope, and inside it were 30 years of receipts, transfer slips, and silent sacrifices. Proof that love wasn't the only thing we'd handed Daniel. We'd handed him our future. Ms. Dalton glanced up from her desk, took one look at my face, and smiled like a doctor who knows the patient has finally decided to fight. "Ready?" she asked. I sat down, exhaled. "I am now." We spread the papers across her desk, line by line, year by year. When we were done, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with something like reverence. "You've been financing his entire adult life." She didn't say it like an accusation. She said it like a diagnosis. And the cure was long overdue. "First," she said, "we'll update your estate documents. You're not legally obligated to leave him anything. Not after all this." She pulled out a fresh form, handed me a pen. "I want you to think carefully about who actually deserves what you've built." That part didn't take long. Half of everything, the house, the savings, even John's stocks, would go to a foundation supporting elderly widows. The other half would be placed in a protected education trust for Lily, my granddaughter. She was still young, still kind, still reachable. "Nothing for Daniel or Claire," I said flatly. Ms. Dalton didn't blink. She just kept writing. "Second," she continued, "you mentioned you're co-owner of Daniel's company." I nodded. John and I had put up the original capital 10 years ago, a marketing firm. Daniel had asked us to stay silent partners, and we had, until now. "I'd like to review the company's structure and financials," she said. "If he's been funneling funds, you'll have the right to audit. And if he's mismanaging, you have grounds to remove him." Remove him. The words were heavy, but also clean, a relief I didn't know I'd craved. "Do it," I said. "Every step." She nodded. "We'll file everything by the end of the week. This will hit hard. Be prepared." I smiled. I've been hit harder, and I'm still standing. As I gathered my things, Ms. Dalton stood. "You know," she said gently, "you're not just reclaiming money. You're reclaiming your power." I paused at the door and looked back. "No," I said softly, "I'm claiming it for the first time." At the end of the week, I returned to Ms. Dalton's office. The pen in my hand didn't tremble. Not this time. The revised will sat in front of me, 3 crisp pages and a signature line at the bottom. Daniel's name had been removed entirely. Claire's, too. And in its place, Lily Whitmore, my granddaughter, and the Widows Support Foundation, a program John and I had always talked about starting someday when we had time. Time had run out, so I was making it count. Ms. Dalton slid the final form across the table. "This is irrevocable once filed. Are you certain?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm not leaving ashes behind for someone to steal." I signed. One stroke after another. No second thoughts. The moment I put the pen down, it was like a storm inside me finally broke. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. I smiled. Not out of bitterness. Not even revenge. It was something deeper. Relief. For decades, I'd lived under this illusion that love meant surrender. That to be a good mother, I had to give and give until I vanished. But motherhood wasn't supposed to be martyrdom. And legacy, real legacy, wasn't about blood. It was about values. And Daniel had sold his. For cake and champagne. After the signing, Ms. Dalton handed me a copy of the documents, neatly clipped and sealed. "I've also prepared a letter," she said, "for Daniel. It explains, legally, what's changed. I can mail it certified." I took the envelope and slipped it into my purse. "No," I said, "I'll deliver it myself, when the time is right." Because I wanted to look him in the eyes when he realized the faucet had been shut off. That the safety net he always assumed would catch him, the one John and I wove with our sweat and savings, was gone. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and reread the trust papers for Lily. 4 pages, structured so Claire couldn't touch a dime of it. Tuition, housing, study abroad, even emergency medical funds, all protected, all locked until Lily turned 18. John would have approved. He always said Lily had his eyes, but she had my heart. She'd once used her allowance to buy me tea when I had the flu. Daniel never even called that week. So no, I wasn't abandoning family. I was finally choosing the part that deserved me. The first consequence came quicker than I expected. On Wednesday morning, I walked into Whitmore Creative, Daniel's company, without warning. A receptionist I'd never met tried to stop me at the door. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you have an appointment with Mr. Whitmore?" I smiled politely. "No, dear. I own half of Mr. Whitmore's company." That shut her up. The building looked expensive, but hollow, all glossy walls and fake smiles. Daniel had always been good at appearances. He liked sleek logos, cocktail launches, designer furniture. But I wasn't here for decor. I was here for the books. I met the operations manager, a quiet woman named Eliza who'd been there since the beginning. I introduced myself. She stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. "You're the Mrs. Whitmore?" "Yes, the one who wrote the first check." She led me into the conference room and pulled up the digital reports I'd requested through Ms. Dalton, and what I saw made my stomach twist. Invoices never sent, contracts mishandled, a dozen clients gone in the past year. Daniel had been charging personal expenses to the business, dinners, luxury hotel stays, even spa visits listed as client wellness. Eliza leaned in, whispering like we were in a confessional. Everyone's afraid to say anything. He gets defensive. Claire calls in screaming if anyone asks about reimbursements. I close the file. "Don't worry. You won't need to confront him." She looked startled. "Are you firing him?" "No," I said, standing. "I'm documenting everything. We're doing this legally. I'll remove him the way he taught me to disappear, quietly and with paperwork." 2 days later, Ms. Dalton filed the formal motion to dissolve Daniel's executive authority. Since I held half the shares and he'd violated the operating agreement, he was suspended pending review. He found out Monday morning, not from me. From a certified letter with my signature on it, I was told he stormed out of the building, shouting that it was a misunderstanding, an attack, and elder abuse. Claire posted a passive-aggressive quote on Instagram that same afternoon. "Sometimes the people who gave you the most expect the most, and that's toxic." I didn't respond, because I didn't need to anymore. Let them flail, let them scream into their echo chamber of entitlement. I had done nothing but hold up a mirror. And now they were finally seeing themselves, not as victims, but as people who'd mistaken kindness for weakness. And then this happened. She came in like a storm in heels. No appointment, no phone call, just the sharp click of stilettos down the hall and the smell of overpriced perfume. I was in my office at the firm. Yes, my office now, reviewing the shareholder transfer documents with Ms. Dalton when the door slammed open. Claire, face red, eyes blazing, dressed like she was headed to brunch, not war. "You can't do this," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger across the desk. "This is Daniel's company. You're senile if you think you can just walk in and—" Ms. Dalton stood slowly, placing one calm hand on the file between us. "I'm going to stop you right there," she said, voice like polished steel. "You are not a shareholder. You are not an employee. And if you raise your voice again, I'll have security escort you out." But Claire wasn't listening. She turned her rage toward me. "You ungrateful witch! We've taken care of you for years. We invited you to holidays. We let you stay in our lives after John died, and now you stab us in the back like this?" I didn't flinch. Not even once. "You missed his funeral, Claire." I said it quietly. The room dropped 10 degrees. "You skipped the one day that mattered," she scoffed, folding her arms. "You act like we killed the man. He was old, Helen. You can't expect us to put our lives on hold forever just because your husband died." Ms. Dalton's eyes narrowed. I could feel her fury vibrating through the desk, but I stayed calm. Because Claire wasn't here to apologize. She was here to scare me. She thought if she shouted loud enough, the old me would come crawling back. Checkbook in hand. I folded my hands. "I want you to listen very carefully," I said. "Daniel has been removed from the business for misconduct. If he contests it, he'll face a full audit and likely a civil suit. And you will not contact me again unless it's through counsel." Claire laughed, a wild, hollow sound. "You know what this is?" she hissed. "This is elder abuse. You're being manipulated. That lawyer is putting ideas in your head." Enough. It was Ms. Dalton this time. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "I'm calling security." Claire leaned in, voice low and poisonous. "You think you've won? You think you can humiliate us and just walk away?" Then she smiled. "We'll see how long that piece of yours lasts." She turned and stormed out. I didn't say a word until the door slammed behind her. Then I whispered, "Finally," because now the mask was off, and the war had officially begun. They thought I'd stay quiet, that I'd be too ashamed to let people know what had happened. They forgot who raised this community Sunday school kids, who baked the pies for the church auction, who chaired the library fundraiser 6 years running. I wasn't just some background character in their story. I was the story. And once Claire's tantrum made its way through the gossip vine, which it did in less than 48 hours, things began to shift, not with shouts or headlines, but in those quiet, devastating ways that small towns know best. At church that Sunday, people hugged me longer than usual. Mrs. Temple, from the Altar Guild, leaned in and whispered, "He didn't show up to his father's funeral. We all noticed." Reverend Blake gave me a gentle nod from the pulpit during announcements. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. After the service, the whispers began. "Did you hear? Skipped the funeral to throw a birthday party. $500,000 given over the years. Called her a burden. Can you imagine?" At the golf club, where Daniel used to strut like he owned the greens, someone mentioned he'd been asked not to return until the situation was resolved. By Wednesday, Claire's Pilates instructor stopped tagging her in posts. The country club charity board quietly removed her from the spring gala committee. One of the clients Daniel had scammed called the office directly and said, "I want to work with Mrs. Whitmore, not her son." I didn't gloat, not out loud, but inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Dignity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about balance, about letting the world see the truth I'd carried alone for far too long. Mary, my sister, stopped by that week with pie and said, "I ran into Claire at the salon. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days." I didn't respond. She added, "I always knew she was clever, but I never knew she was mean." She paused, then leaned forward. "And I'm proud of you, Helen, for standing up, for not going down with the ship." It was the first time someone had said that to me, and I held on to it like a life raft, because I wasn't sinking anymore. I wasn't gasping for breath in a sea of guilt and silence. I was rising. And Daniel? He was finally learning what it felt like to fall. It started with the credit card company, then the mortgage lender, then the BMW dealership. One by one, the dominoes began to fall. You see, when I withdrew as guarantor on Daniel's accounts, personal and business, they were exposed for what they were, cardboard castles propped up by my name. And now, the wind was blowing. I got the first call from the bank myself. "Mrs. Whitmore, just confirming. You've rescinded all personal guarantees on Mr. Whitmore's lines of credit?" "Yes," I said, steady and clear. "Any future obligations are his alone." There was a pause. Then the woman on the other end replied, "Understood. We'll proceed accordingly." Click. The next day, the bank froze his business line. The day after that, the mortgage company issued a notice of default. By Friday, the fancy BMW, the one Claire used to brag about having custom-stitched leather, was gone. Towed, broad daylight, right out of their driveway. I didn't see it myself, but Mary sent me a picture. The car on the flatbed, Claire standing on the lawn in fuzzy slippers, yelling at a man in a reflective vest. The caption? The Whitmores are no longer accepting reality in installments. Their house was next. 5 bedrooms, 4 baths, and a mortgage that bled money like an open wound. Once I withdrew, they couldn't cover the difference. Daniel tried to sell quickly, but the market wasn't kind. No one wants a desperate man's castle, especially when the HOA's whispering about unpaid dues and foreclosure notices. I heard Claire moved into her sister's spare room, temporarily. Daniel stayed behind, stubborn as ever, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. But you can't rebuild with lies and entitlement. He called me again that week, 5 times in one day, left voicemails ranging from guilt to rage. Mom, you've ruined us. Claire's talking about separation. Are you happy now? I've given you everything. You're letting strangers take what's mine. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because this wasn't punishment, it was consequence. For every time I'd written a check when I should have set a boundary. For every time I bit my tongue instead of saying, grow up. For every time John and I went without, so he could flash borrowed success. The money was gone, but so was the silence. Daniel was unraveling. And for once, the only person he could blame was the man in his own mirror. I got the call from a friend, not Mary. This time it was Janice, from the church hospitality team. Her voice was low, but eager. Helen, you're not going to believe this. Claire slapped him. In public. It happened at La Belle, the overpriced French place they used to post about weekly. They were mid-dinner, apparently. Some kind of makeup meal. Daniel had brought flowers. Claire wore red. They looked like they were pretending to be a couple again. And then, someone said the bill came. Daniel's card declined. Twice. He made a scene. Claire made a bigger one. She stood, threw her napkin, and said, loudly enough for the next table to hear, I'm married into wealth, not debt. Then slapped him. Not a dramatic movie slap. A real, sharp, open palm reckoning. She stormed out. He chased her. The manager followed them with the unpaid bill. Janice said half the restaurant watched like it was live theater, and someone filmed it. Of course they did. By the next morning, the clip was floating around Facebook with a caption that made me chuckle. Gold digger finds the mine is empty. Claire filed for divorce the following week. Her lawyer sent a letter to Daniel, listing the assets she expected to walk away with. Assets, of course, they no longer had. And Daniel? He showed up at my door the day after she left. No appointment, no text, just a knock. Soft this time, almost childlike. I opened it slowly. He looked thinner, worn, like someone who'd been eating guilt and sleeping in humiliation. His voice cracked. Mom, can I come in? I stood in the doorway. He looked past me, like he was expecting the house to look the same, like nothing had changed. But everything had, especially me. I lost her, he said, swallowing hard. I lost everything. I nodded. I know. I need help. His voice broke. I need you. He waited for the mother who used to drop everything. The one who used to say yes before he finished asking. But she didn't live here anymore. This woman in the doorway, she had boundaries now. I looked him in the eye and asked, when was your father's birthday? He blinked. I don't know. October? No, I said. September 12th. He looked down. Couldn't meet my eyes. I tried again. What was his favorite flower? His lips parted. Roses? Lilies. John loved lilies. We planted them every spring. And Daniel never noticed. He didn't even try to answer after that. Just stood there, deflated, waiting for me to offer the old rhythm. The open door. The rescue. The mother who fixed everything. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at the man in front of me, this stranger I had given life to, and felt something worse than anger. Distance. He'd been circling wealth and comfort his entire life, mistaking it for love. And now that the money was gone, so was his identity. He left without a scene. No yelling. No more guilt trips. Just a quiet, broken walk back to his car. A rusting Toyota borrowed from a cousin. The BMW was long gone. The suit he wore sagged slightly. Expensive fabric, yes, but dry cleaned one too many times. He looked like a child pretending to be a man, and the world had noticed. He'd built a life on my shoulders. Now he was learning what the ground felt like. It was a bright, cloudless morning, almost cruel in how normal it looked. I didn't plan to be there. I told myself I wouldn't go, but I parked across the street anyway, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the scene unfold like a stranger. The auctioneer stood on the courthouse steps with a clipboard and a voice like gravel. A small crowd gathered, realtors, investors, neighbors, pretending not to gawk. And in the center of it all stood my son, Daniel. The house Daniel once called his forever home was now just another listing on the courthouse steps. The auctioneer read off the details. 5 bedrooms, 4 baths, foreclosed, no reserve. Daniel stood alone on the sidewalk, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Claire wasn't there. She'd already changed her last name back on social media. The bidding started low, insultingly low, given what we paid to put them there. $320,000. Then $340. A pause. A man in a gray blazer raised his hand. $345. Another raised $350. Back and forth it went, quick, clinical. In under 6 minutes, it was over, sold. Final bid, $379,000. To a representative from a local housing nonprofit. Ms. Dalton's idea, we'd quietly arranged it last week. The property would be converted into transitional housing for older widows and displaced women. Women like me, women who'd been discarded once they'd outlived their usefulness. Daniel didn't know that yet. He just stood there, stunned, as the keys were handed off to a stranger. Then he turned and saw me, sitting behind the windshield, watching everything. He didn't wave, didn't shout. He just stared. Because he understood. This hadn't been a coincidence. It had been planned. Step by step. I didn't get out of the car, didn't offer comfort. There was nothing left to say. He'd chosen this path every time he ignored a call, missed a funeral, or used love like an ATM code. The house was gone. The business was gone. Claire was gone. Now the roof over his head belonged to someone else, someone who would actually use it to help people, not to pose for holiday cards and champagne toasts. As the crowd dispersed, I turned the key in the ignition and drove away. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. And Daniel, for the first time in his life, was finally on his own. He got exactly what he spent years earning: isolation, debt, and the bitter taste of his own choices. And me? I may not have the family I thought I raised, but I have peace, and in this season of my life, peace is everything.